The fiscal cliff was averted today when Congress and President Obama extended the Bush tax cuts, except for those making more than $500,000 a year. But there was no agreement, however, on making any cuts to federal spending. The federal government closed the books on its 2013 fiscal year yesterday, and unexpectedly, the deficit is back up at $1.5 trillion. The escalating costs of Medicare and Medicaid are largely to blame, along with sluggish tax receipts from a continuing weak economy. It appears the Grinch is arriving just in time for Christmas. Two ratings agencies downgraded the credit rating of the U.S. government today, saying the government has not demonstrated any plan to stop the hemorrhaging of debt. Our reporter Jeff Hutter is on Wall Street with some reaction from economists on what this will mean to most Americans. Jeff?
Mandy, the ratings that credit companies like Standard & Poor's give to the federal government are much the same as credit scores for all of us. With the downgrade today, the government will pay higher interest when it borrows from entities like the Chinese government. And perhaps even worse, economists say it will also translate into higher borrowing costs for all of us, whether we're looking for a home or a car, further dampening the economy.
With the full start of Obamacare now underway, one clear trend is already taking hold. Many more people than originally projected are signing up for the government health plan. Thousands of employers are dropping their plans, choosing instead to pay the fee for the government plan. This is pushing millions more people into the program. And more people are coming into the health care plan through Medicaid. Medicaid was expected to grow by 15% the first year, but it's now clear its enrollment will grow by 25%, leading to much larger increases in government costs for the program, at least $300 billion per year. But for a brief time today, most Americans took their minds off the lagging economy and healthcare troubles to watch the Miami Dolphins beat the Atlanta Falcons 24-21 in the Super Bowl. How about those Fins, Andrew? A double whammy today for the federal budget that will add hundreds of billions of dollars to the federal deficit. Jeff Hutter reports from the Capitol.
When Obamacare was debated in 2010, President Obama said that the government would cut about $70 billion a year out of Medicare to pay for the program. Well, today that savings went out the window when the White House bowed to pressure from hospitals and doctors who said the cuts would seriously damage care to seniors. And the cost of providing the health insurance exchanges for people going on to government insurance has doubled from earlier estimates. Those two parts of the new health care law alone have now added $200 billion to the federal deficit. For those who have private insurance, the news wasn't much better today. A private industry group said that regulations in Obamacare now have added about 16% onto the cost of health insurance premiums.
Having trouble finding work? Well, you're not alone. New unemployment figures have the nation's unemployment rate back up to 10%. Higher interest rates and a general lack of confidence in the direction of the country are blamed for the high rate. And the cloud that hangs over the federal government, that huge debt, is only getting darker. President Obama acknowledged today that with the much higher than expected cost of health care, the debt this year will likely reach $2 trillion, taking the overall federal debt to $20 trillion. In a surprising move, China and Japan have indicated they will stop investing in U.S. government bonds. Though on first look, this may seem inconsequential to the average investor, it will have a long-term impact on the ability of the government to find a buyer for its debt. Without the inflow of foreign cash, the government will be forced to make severe spending cuts. The spigot is off. Reaction from D.C. is not good. Jeff, how bad is it?
Mandy, devastating. That's how most congressional leaders term today's decision by China and Japan to stop buying our bonds, to stop lending the U.S. money. To understand how devastating, let's look at some simple figures. Our government spends more than $11 billion each day and borrows about a third of that, meaning we borrow about $4 billion a day. Without that money from China, Japan, or someone to buy the bonds, the government will either have to stop paying its bills, like Social Security, or start printing more money. And economists warn that printing even more money than we are now will lead to very painful inflation.
A painful irony is hitting Americans when they can least afford it. Inflation is here with a vengeance. With the Federal Reserve's quantitative easing schemes of the past 5 years flooding the market with money, the dollar is now worth less than it has been in decades. And the cost of everything is on its way up. Bread up 12% over last year, meat up 16%, and utilities up 14%. And perhaps worst of all, unemployment is up too. It's now at 15%. A stunning announcement today from Treasury Secretary Jacob Lew. The tax hikes and budget cuts implemented earlier this year are not reducing the deficit enough to stop an approaching default of the U.S. Treasury. So, drastic reductions are being imposed immediately in Social Security payments, and deeper cuts will be made in Medicare, Medicaid, and all welfare programs. The scene in several U.S. cities today looked much like Europe, but it wasn't. As Americans reached a boiling point over cuts in federal programs and a bad economy, hundreds of thousands took to the streets today. One of the largest demonstrations was in Chicago. Our Jeff Hutter was there. Jeff?
Mandy, there have been no official estimates of the number of people at this demonstration today, but police I talked with put the crowd at somewhere around 50,000 people. Word of this demonstration came suddenly last night as public employee unions started circulating notices on the internet, encouraging people to come here today to express opposition to the government cutbacks the past few months. So far, there has been no serious violence, only some shoving between police and protesters. We think there have been some arrests, but no official word of that.
With the federal government struggling to keep alive programs like Social Security, Medicare, and food stamps, President Obama today declared an economic state of emergency, which he says will allow him to nationalize large companies that have benefited from American ingenuity and purchasing power. First is Apple, with $238 billion in cash, and then ExxonMobil, with $51 billion in cash and investments. Seizing the assets of those companies will provide enough cash to sustain the federal government for a little over 1 month. Stock analysts say the move, if it is upheld by the Supreme Court, now with a 5-4 voting advantage for Obama, will essentially gut the companies of their top people. One analyst said the iPhone X will likely be Apple's last innovation. With unemployment now at 18% in America, there may not be anywhere left for Americans to look for work. Canada, which has a strong economy after addressing its debt problems a decade ago, announced tough measures to keep Americans from illegally entering the country to find work. The Canadian newspaper supported the move in an editorial today, saying Americans can live with the repercussions of their past lifestyles.